Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Trébault, and as mentioned in that kind introduction, I am the director of the Artist at Risk Connection, ARC, a project of PEN America. PEN America is the American chapter of PEN International that has protected freedom of expression and writing for 100 years. PEN America created ARC in 2017 to help protect artists of all disciplines, including musicians. With this in mind, I would like to warmly thank you for joining us on International Music Freedom Day as we engage in a crucial discussion on the threats musicians face worldwide with our panel, Growing Politically Based Music Censorship Today. I'm delighted and honored to moderate this conversation with my fellow panelists. So worldwide, musicians have become one of the most targeted artistic disciplines. In 2021, there were 385 cases of censorship against musicians, according to the State of Artistic Freedom report from our colleagues at Free Muse. Of these cases, restrictions were imposed on 198 cases due to politics. At ARC, more than 13% of the requests for assistance we receive come from musicians. In countries such as Iran, Afghanistan, Myanmar, or Cuba, musicians have led social movements, protests, and vigils. Their free expression as per anthems that articulate the hardships their communities face, demand tangible and immediate change, and spread a message of hope for a better future. The power of music to connect communities and strike a common chord, especially when considered politically charged or dissident, is frequently met with state-led attempts to extinguish and censor critical voices and content. As musicians rally society and the global community around their cause for greater freedom and the respect of human rights, repressive governments increasingly respond with intense surveillance, detention, and torture, among other violent and censorious actions. Whether the detention of the Iranian rapper Toomaj Salehi in danger of execution for his participation in the Iran protests, the unjust imprisonment of the Cuban rapper and lyricist Mai Khoi Castillo Perez, co-author of Patria y Vida, the anthem of the July 11, 2021 mass demonstration in Cuba, or the relentless persecution of the Russian feminist protest and performance group, the Pussy Riots, by the Russian state, musicians are in dire need of our support. Individuals, organizations, and the international community cannot idly stand by as these artists risk their lives and livelihoods. We must stand in solidarity with musicians and demand that governments worldwide respect artistic freedom and free expression. In today's panel, our expert guests will discuss the growing challenges musicians face, the state of censorship in music today, and how individuals and organizations should work to reimagine how they support musicians who are persecuted for making politically based music. Without further ado, I will give the floor to our lovely panelists for brief introduction and then get straight into our discussion. Please, Khoi, if you would be so kind to start us off.
Thank you, Julie. My name is Mai Khoi. I was born and grew up from Vietnam, and I used to be a pop star in Vietnam, and I had to work under the censorship system in Vietnam for more than 15 years. When I involved in activism in 2016, I got a lot of troubles from the government. I was banned from singing in public in my own country. I was isolated from my community. I was under surveillance, detained, and evicted from my house so many times. And at the end of 2019, I was forced to leave my country. So that's why I'm here now in the US.
Thank you very much, Khoi. Farida?
Hello, everyone. So my name is Farida Shahid, and I'm here basically because I was the former and first Special Rapporteur for the United Nations Human Rights Council on Cultural Rights. And in 2013, I wrote a first report, which was on the freedom essential for artistic creativity and expression. I have to say here that first of all, nobody knew what cultural rights were about. And certainly they didn't think that artists had anything to do with the UN, including the artists themselves. Never thought this was a venue for them to come and speak at and to express themselves. So in 2013, I did that report. In 2014, I did two other reports, which partly also talk about artists. And of course, that includes musicians. One was on the rights to copyright. And we had significantly, especially, but not only musicians involved in that. And the second was on advertising. The advertising one really had to do more with graphic street designers, but it could also very easily be a question also of performing music in the streets. And I think the great thing is that people have used this report to go forward. And I think some of the essential things that came, of course, the violation, it's been a human right since 1948 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which talks about the right to enjoy art. The International Covenant on Social, Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights very specifically speaks about the freedom indispensable for artistic expression. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights also speaks about how the freedom of expression, the right to freedom of expression, also includes expression in forms of artistic creativity. So to me, it was something that's very, very important. And I think it's something that even after leaving my mandate, I've continued to work with different groups on the issue of artistic freedoms because of the huge pressure and, as you said, the violations of rights taking place across the world. And it's not something which is singular and particular to a particular place or region. It happens everywhere. And I think one of the reasons to me that is very important is because artists, of course they entertain, but they're also part of the cultural dynamics that give new expression to new thoughts, to critical thinking. And artists come under attack when they are questioning those, when they become a counterpoint to the powers that be. And I think that's what people are trying to silence. And I think artists are in a particularly difficult situation because they have to engage with the public. Their work is to engage with their public. If you don't, it's like journalists. So there's some things that you can do where you're not so you don't run that high risk, but when you engage with the public, you have to, then that risk is higher. Sorry, I've spoken a lot. I can talk about my work in Pakistan afterwards. I'm a human rights activist and I run a women's rights organization in Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Farida. Sarah?
Hello, yes, I'm Sarah Wyatt, and I'm a long-time advocate for artistic freedom. As Julie said, I worked for many, many years at PEN International, focusing then just on writers. And when I was working at PEN, we frequently had cases of artists come before us. And I found that under my mandate, there wasn't much that we could do because we were an organization of writers for writers. And I began to see that there weren't the kind of networks or support groups that there were for writers and journalists. So when I left PEN 10 years ago now, I started focusing on this. And I've since been very lucky to be taken on by UNESCO, where I'm now a member of its expert panel on the 2005 Convention on the Promotion and Protection of Artistic Freedom, where we have been looking at the various aspects of cultural life, political life that suppress those artistic freedoms. I'm currently working with the Council of Europe. We'll be producing a report, I think, in about a month, which is looking specifically at what's happening in Europe. Because we do tend to see, as certainly in Europe, we do tend to see human rights abusers as being elsewhere. But in fact, they are everywhere. In every society, there is suppression of the arts. Now, when I'm doing my work, I tend to separate it into above the radar and below the radar. Above the radar is when people are arrested, when there are maybe mob attacks on artworks. Generally speaking, those are reported and recorded generally, not always, but they're recorded. Under the radar are the kind of things that might stop an artist from practicing self-censorship, for instance. So they might be things like not being able to access permits to perform because of the kind of work that they do. It might be pressures from other professional organizations. It might be just the very precarity of being an artist, whether you're a musician or a painter or otherwise, might make you more concerned about not doing the kind of work that might stop you from getting sponsorship, because you're reliant on sponsorship, or you're reliant on a certain space, or you're reliant on a theatre giving you access to perform. So there are these two levels. So when you start looking at artistic freedom under the above the radar, the kind of thing that you might be able to read in a newspaper or see from certain kind of reporting, or the more subtle censorship, you begin to see the whole gamut of repressions. And Farida has certainly touched on that on her report. So yeah, it's a very complex picture. Speaking specifically about musicians, and actually I'd say performance artists as such, again, as Farida says, in order to be a musician, in order to be an actor, in order to be a performance artist, you have to put yourself out into the environment. And that can make you particularly a target, because if you're playing an instrument on a demonstration, or if you are on the stage, you're more likely to get attacked. So that might also be a self-censorship push, shall we say. So yeah, I mean, there's so much we could be saying about this, and I'm looking forward to hearing the other comments in the exchange that's coming up. But we'll leave that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Pamela?
Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for this invitation. Well, as Farida and Sarah, I'm not such an expert in the topic, but I'm, of course, wanting to propose my point of view from the Latin American perspective and what's happening in the region. As introduced, I'm Pamela Lopez, and currently living somewhere in between Chile and Argentina, moving from one country to the other, and working as an independent consultant. I was a former director of programming and audiences at GAM, which is a very, very large cultural center in Chile, where I had the privilege, of course, of working with a lot of artists in the context of the performing arts, particularly theater, music, and dance. So we promoted a lot of these conversations among what's going on in Latin America. And of course, I'm happy to get to discuss, and I believe for now, all those under the radar consequences that are aligned with the difficulties around being able to promote and to do art in our region. There is a lot of political, of course, censorship and of political problems going around Latin America, but not so visible and not so directly, I would say, directly proposed as they are in such other countries. So I will be very happy to see and discuss how all this ecosystem works and how we can promote ideas and foster new propositions in terms of making things better for artists and, of course, for musicians.
Thanks a lot, Pamela, and thank you for your kind introduction and putting us right on topic. So as I have a kind of a general question for you to start off. So we are in this panel about politically based music censorship. I was wondering if there is a way, kind of a lot of talk on artistic freedom is also centered to the politics and to the dissent voices. So there's a way to distinguish politics from the art and political censorship from other form of censorship. I'm kind of directing this question to all of you, but I don't know if one of you would like to start off about, you know, like this kind of distinction.
I think we actually need to also not forget, I know we're focusing on political censorship, but I think it is also important not to forget market censorship. And that is also a form, and that censorship starts from the beginning. And when you have an oppressive society, I have lived in Pakistan for decades, mostly under military rule of one sort or the other. And art performance was something that we found essential to keep people's spirits up. So when they try and block you, it's something that the artists are able to do, especially with music, is to really engage the public in an emotional way, psychological way, apart from intellectual. So when you're doing politics, it kind of feels like that dimension may not be so visible. In music, it is. And for instance, under the military rule, one of the military rules in Pakistan, they actually banned the drums from one of the music festivals because they felt it would be too emotive, and it would encourage people to be resilient, to resist what was going on. But, you know, we've heard from artists, for instance, I think he was from Malaysia, talking about how these things merge together. And it's so when you have oppression in a political, social form, it's not just of the artists, but the artists are part of the target. But when there's an oppressive regime, you also find less support for the artists and for self-expression. And I think that's something that we need to be very wary of, that you need that interconnection. You start losing, you know, your circles of social capital or support start unraveling when you become a target. So if you're specifically in with musicians, poets, people who use words, it becomes very targeted. And whether they meant that or not, that happens. And then they don't feel they have the space to link up. They're losing their friends. They're losing family, doesn't want to meet. I think those are aspects which we don't talk enough about. And I'm being involved with some of the safe haven cities. And I think that's one alternative, is to have these networks in safe cities, but also engaging with artists who've been relocated. They also feel a different kind of pressure, that they are seen as artists refugees. And so you have to fit into that. And to me, I'm sorry, that is another form of restricting your expression. And they feel, so I think there's multiple things people are trying. I really think we all need to step up to the plate, regardless of whether we're in the art world or not, because to me, this is violation of basic fundamental human rights. And all of us need to come together for that. Sorry, not exactly an answer to your question, but to kick off the discussion.
But to kick off the discussion, Khoi, I'm wondering if you can jump in, because I mean, you have this kind of also political aspect, you know, for your career as a musician and activist. You met Barack Obama when he came to visit Vietnam in 2016. You ran for a seat at the National Assembly of Vietnam. So what kind of these experiences and the experiences of being banned and attacked in your country have kind of taught you about the role of music, and music, you know, like as you know, an important vehicle for free expression and for denouncing human rights views?
I have experienced these political events in Vietnam, so I could see the strength of music in politics and the big influence of politics to music, because I could use my fame to nominate myself for the National Assembly election, to raise awareness for people about their right to participate in politics. I could use music to exercise my own right. And and spread the political messages and encourage my colleagues, like another artists, musicians, singers, and also the audience to do the same thing. So I could feel the role of music in politics is very important. And if you use that in the good way, you will win your aim. And I think the influence of political messages or the influence of politics to music is also very strong, because I experienced this kind of political events. I feel the very strong feeling to write the powerful music. Yeah, my music is much more powerful than the music I wrote before, and it helped me to engage with people, and I feel myself grow up as the real artist. So I think politics and music should go together to support together.
Can I just add to what Mai Khoi is saying? I'm doing some research for Free Muse at the moment. I've been struck by the number of popular musicians who have got huge fan bases for their pop music, their rap, their songs about, I don't know, love and general life, you know. When things have happened in their countries, in countries like Thailand and others, they've turned to writing, rapping, singing, performing about what they see going on around them. And that makes them particularly dangerous, I think, because their audience is a very different audience from, say, you know, even those that read the newspapers or the academics. These people don't read newspapers, but many of them do, of course, I'm generalizing. But they already have a massive fan base, sometimes thousands and thousands of people watching them on TikTok. So when they take up the political challenge, shall we say, they are bringing with them a young, usually young audience that is very, very challenging to the government. So these are why people such as yourself and others find themselves particularly targeted. And I'd also like to pick up on a point that Farida said. When artists go abroad to take up exile or live abroad, there is a huge, by that I mean artists who have had to leave the country because of politics, there is often a huge amount of expectation from their host to talk and be about certain topics. I've had some of these artists talk about the pressure to focus only on conflict, only on women's issues, only on whatever it is. And they cannot get the support. Say, I remember one young woman saying to me, I'm only ever being asked to write about what it is to be a woman, what it is to experience rape and other violations under war, when I want to write my book on my romance. So I think we have to be very careful that we don't put people who have come from one restrictive environment into another restrictive environment, to be quite conscious of that when we are dealing with people who have left these hostile environments. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think for our own experience in working with many organizations that are providing fellowship, you know, for artists to relocate in other country, I feel that what you say, Farida and Sarah, are really critical and relevant in, you know, like not, you know, those organizations are responsible also to not like create a new narrative and you know, like use the, you know, like the story of the artist, the story of persecution, you know, like as the only mean to highlight the work of the artist, because the artist is, you know, as agency and give more agency to artists to really be like the narrator of their own story. And I think I have witnessed this a lot, but I feel one of the things also I wanted kind of to bring to the panel is also the lack of support for those artists who are, as they would like to be called, like immigrants artists, refugees artists in these countries where actually once they are part of a fellowship, this fellowship is ended quite soon. It's just a year. It's not enough to really recoup with a new life, a new language. It's a lot of challenges to be confronted into, and there are really a lack of professional development and like really infrastructure from those, not program, but from the country, from the hosted country, to really make those artists, part of their new cultural fabric. And I'd love to hear, Pamela, on your kind of experience in LATAM, but also Khoi, in your experience in the US, because you have been there now since almost 2 years, even more than 2 years. And I'd love to hear, what you think are very challenging as an artist who are, not anymore in your own country and with your own audience.
Maybe I can jump in before Khoi, because there's some notes I'm taking from what I'm hearing from Sarah and Faride as well. Just like hearing out what everyone is saying in the panel, for me, it's very difficult to make a differentiation between two words that are pretty straightforward in English, like policy and politics. Actually, in Spanish, there's only one word for both of these. We say política, and we mean policy and we mean politics, So in that way, and regarding to language and making this reflection upon that, I would say that everything that we do in an ecosystem where government is involved, in our daily lives, and that means the market as well, and it means everything that comes to be from a neoliberal point of view, where the government is as well part of a mix and match between public policy and private policy, at least in Latin America and particularly in Chile. It's very hard to think about something being non-political, and about dividing these ideas of artistic constraints and repression from political perspectives. And I would say that particularly in Chile, we have a long history of these topics and issues. We went through a very long dictatorship in the past, and we have an icon in music, which is Víctor Jara, a very well-known Chilean singer who was tortured and killed by the military. And I also think that the fact that this year Chile is turning 50 years from the coup has turned out to be a resilient moment for us in terms of memory and reflection. And the question open is how not to, how do we move forward from that experiences, and how do we become resilient as a nation, as a country, and of course as a continent, to all this under the radar, I would say, in order to use Sarah's concept, political constraints. For us today, I would say the majority has to do, and it's a lot in regards to the ability to work, to be able to live out from our work. Money, of course, has to do a lot with that. And the fact that it's very hard to understand in Latin America how people can become a professional artist, and professional in the terms and in the ways that they could live out from what they do. And then they can have the chance, the opportunity, the different means matters, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's education, in order to be able to develop themselves as professional artists. There is still a big issue in that in Latin America, and a constraint. Actually, if you see different polls or interviews with people, you would say there is a particular percentage that I want to share with you, but in Chile at least, only 29% of the artists are expected to get paid for what they do. So there is almost 70% of people doing professional work that are not even expecting to get paid for their jobs, for their work, and that is something that is really a big big issue now. I know, of course, in light of all other situations that are going on around the world, it seems maybe not too urgent, but it's relevant as well. And I just wanted to add that to the conversation, or maybe close the conversation to what maybe Sarah, Faride, and Khoi were saying.
Can I just add to that, when I'm working with UNESCO, the social and economic rights of artists are very tied into the overall picture of artistic freedom. And one of the key rights is the right to be paid for the work that you do. Is that the work of an artist, of a musician, is work. It's not just play. And this does have an effect on the total artistic freedom. As I mentioned earlier, it does have concerns about money, concerns about not rocking the boat. You may not do something simply because you may not get paid. You may not be put up for the sponsorship that you absolutely require. So you're absolutely right. It really has to be seen as part of the right to artistic freedom, is to be paid properly, to have access to social and economic rights that the rest of citizens do, if you do in your country, of course, that is. And yes, so I'm glad that you pointed that out.
So very briefly also, Pamela, just to let you know that in my report, this is a specific point I've made, that the human right to artistic creativity and expression is not just a question of freedom of expression. It is livelihood. It is opportunities. So you can't say this is a right, but then not provide the means for the people to enjoy that right. And that means, of course, sponsorship has its own issues, but absolutely, this is something which is holistic. Khoi, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please go ahead and give us your experiences. We jumped in with Pamela.
Yeah, I know artists around the world have to face with many different kinds of political system and conservative culture, traditional system, and another commercial censorship that you just said. Yes, and it's have different kind of level of censorship as well. When I was in Vietnam, I couldn't, because we don't have freedom of expression, we don't have artists' freedom. The political music-based system in Vietnam, basically just the music, that propaganda for the communist state. If someone doing anything different from that, or you write songs against the state, against the communist, you will be in jail. So basically, we don't really have another kind of political music. Someone doing different thing like me will be forced to leave the country, or be in jail. And I am still trying to make a little change by using music to spread messages and encourage other people to understand their rights. And I think just because of that, I faced so much problem, and that make my life harder and harder. But when I came here, now I'm living in the US, I feel completely free to write music, to perform. But I have to face another problem, is commercials, censorship. I could feel that people here, like the venues in Pittsburgh, where I'm living now, some venues, they don't want to invite me to perform because they saw my videos on YouTube are singing about politics. And yeah, I was thinking, this is a big challenge of artists everywhere, not just me, but we could find another better way to support each other in our human rights field, to support, like, better support for artists in the future.
Can I jump in here, Julie, if you permit? So there are a couple of things I wanted to just flag as we're flagging. We don't have enough time to go into details on anything, but at least we can flag some things. I think also there's, of course, the market censorship is something that I've already spoken about, but the censorship occurs at multiple different levels. So it happens right from the federal or the central government right down to the local theater that won't let you. And it is not just a censorship by the state. So the censorship can equally be of people, so that community may decide. And where the state fails is that they fail to protect the artists, and they give in that, you know, somebody is making a noise, so we can't have these people. But it makes it a little complicated. The other two things I just wanted to flag very quickly. I was very pleased actually after my report, because one of the things is that the right to your music means your music cannot be used by people in political context that is against the wishes of the artist's creativity. So there's a difference of opinion, but that's the position I had taken. And I was very pleased, therefore, to see a number of artists, subsequently musicians, saying to certain politicians in various elections and political, you cannot use my music. I refuse because I don't agree with your politics. And I think that's a very positive thing that is happening. So let's also look at the positives. Finally, I just wanted to flag that currently, of course, a few months ago, I became the special rapporteur for education. So this is, yeah, so this is something that I'm doing since August last year, I mean, September actually. But one of the things I hope to look at is the education of music. And what one of my messages has been to everyone, including UNESCO, is what are we valuing in our education system? So we give a child who does well in mathematics 100 marks because that's brilliant, but a child who is good in music or artistic creativity, and we say that's extracurriculum, it's not counted. Why is that not valued? So I think somewhere along the line, we also need to see the kinds of things we value and we don't value as we're bringing up to society. And if this is not valued, especially modern, different kinds of music, artists, you know, verbalization or other performing arts, I think that's an important thing that we should look at as we go into the future. For musicians, it's likely to get more and more important.
Can I just leap in there? Very glad to hear that you'll be working on education. And one of the recommendations that I've been making in all the reports is that I noticed, we're kind of surprised to see that there is no or very few, if any, modules or training in arts and cultural institutions on artistic freedom. I do one at Goldsmiths College, just one module. I think that had to be absolutely there. Artists need to be told what their rights are, both naturally and probably most important nationally. They need to network, as Mai Khoi was saying. One of the things we're seeing more and more is artists getting together and discussing their problems. And as you say, these problems are complicated and they're not always clear. Some of the regulations are sensible, having some kind of noise regulations in certain areas, yes. But then when they're being applied unfairly or only towards certain types of music or only certain types of expression, we've got that possibility coming up in the UK, for instance, with new laws about decibel levels of protest, for instance. It's a very, very complicated issue, and I don't think that there's going to be always set standard that you can apply precisely for that reason. So the best way is for artists locally, nationally, regionally to get together to share their experiences. Sometimes that experience feels unique to yourself in Poland or wherever it is, but when you start talking to other artists, sometimes not even in the same region, you see that they're being shared. For instance, those kind of under the radar commercial pushes, or the problems of remuneration, or and others. So networking between artists, sharing of experiences, finding solutions is really important, and also education at all levels. But I'd say absolutely must be, if you are studying the arts, you should be studying things like, if you're not already, copyright law. You should be studying what it is you can or cannot do in your country for right or wrong, what the legislation is that might repress it. And then you can either step back and not do that kind of work if you don't want to put yourself in that place, or to actually challenge it and to make changes to the law to make sure that you can. So yes, big topic.
So I agree with you, Sarah, but I also think you need to have other people in the creative industry as part of those discussions. So at the Heidelberg University, they had ran a camp, a summer camp kind of thing for artists, but also for people who are from the donor community, but also people from the creative industries who may be organizing it or sponsoring it, because everybody has to have a better understanding of what it means, of what musicians and other artists' rights should be. And also what may be the remedies. Like, as the Special Rapporteur in Culture, I started getting numerous complaints. And so there are some mechanisms, maybe not so terrifically effective, but they do put the spotlight and they do tell the country that there are people watching what's going on. I think that is something that many more people need to be aware of. So who can you go to? Of course, there are institutions which are specialized, which is good, but I think the networking has to be also with a wider group of people, so that there's a support network even for, musicians are not, usually I say, terrible negotiators. So when it comes to copyrights, etc., they really need people who help them understand, negotiate through this. But they may also need people, when you're arranging a performance somewhere, negotiating with the people who don't want to let you have this, or etc. So I think those people also need to come together somehow in terms of the networking.
Absolutely. I think it had to be across the cultural sector. And as you said, it also had to be with those communities who might be upset by a piece of work. There have been instances where meeting with those communities, talking about the work that you're about to put on, explaining it, and maybe even adapting it a little if you feel that's appropriate. Also talking to, in countries like the UK, you can talk to the police and talk about the dilemma, if you want to call it that, between protecting artistic freedom and protecting public safety. That police are very not tend to go for the public safety option. Yeah, it's a difficult path, and it's all about having conversations. And you're absolutely right that having conversations across the cultural sector with the audience and with those organisations that are dealing with human rights issues, dealing with legal issues. People say arts are unimportant. Just this very conversation we're having, arts seem to touch every sector, every community. So yeah, thank you.
I have the impression and the feeling that that artistic constraints and impositions are also because there is sometimes not such a big community as we would like advocating for the arts, So I'm wondering how we can promote that reinforcement, on audience members, because I think that if people start to, to ask or claim, for different types of genres of music, of different types of art forms, this would help a lot into, of course, the public policy fostering an exchange and changing some little particular things in government. So have you seen any examples that you can give or recommendations upon the audience perspective side?
I think the best way to promote political music or support musicians, artists who involved in activism, the best way to do is invite them to perform their art and pay them, and have a lot of ways for them to show their art. So they will have more audience around the world. And when other artists see them doing well in the human rights fields with their art, they will consider to do the same thing. And also it's make the balance between the market music and the political music. It's kind of making the change about the view of music for audience, also for everyone.
One thing I have noticed is that you do get very high profile cases of attacks on artwork or artists. You do then get mass movements, shall we say, to address these issues. So for instance, in Poland, there was the protest of the taking down of a video of a woman eating a banana from the feminist video from the 1970s, and people really protested against that, and the work was put back up. The challenge really is when you do get those moments, when you do get that public support, when you do get people who will come out and seek change, to keep that momentum. And that's a challenge that I think I would like to explore more, how you can, okay, you don't want the bad situation in the first place, but when you do get it, when you get a positive reaction toward the artwork from the public and the audience, how do we grab that?
I don't know how you grab it, but I do believe that, you know, the musicians and their rights and artists, etc., there has to be a firmer connection with the general human rights movements that may exist and the human rights groups that may exist. That link is obviously not always visible. And in terms of Pamela's question, I think, you know, when the artists are very much part of the movement, it's much easier. Otherwise, you have to create those spaces to do that interlinking, you know, and there are different topics people will take up, but they won't take this up. In Pakistan, for whatever reason, we've had a lot of theater people who've always been part of the movement. And so the theater people also do music and performances, and they've been very much a part of the political resistance. So they are very interlinked, but there will be a lot of musicians who are not interlinked with us. So they may get into a risk situation, but we don't have that connection with them beforehand. We only find out about it afterwards. And so I think if there's greater interlinkages, and the thing is, I agree with you, Sarah, you need to have those networking. The question is, all of this costs money, and you need to therefore have the funds to bring people together, whether it's within a country or across countries. I mean, I'm part of the 9th World Summit on Art and Culture, will now take place, hopefully in May, but it's been postponed for 2 years. So it's been postponed, one, because of COVID, but then it was postponed because visas were not available. And I think that's the other thing that one has to look at is, you know, so people are willing, but then there are all these barriers in the way of coming together, which is something which a number of the artists, when I was doing the report, actually spoke about, and Free Muse in particular, the issue of visas. So you're talking about livelihood, but if you're not given the visa, then you can't go outside and perform, or you can't benefit from a scheme, etc. So I think there's a lot of complicated moving parts, but I think, yeah, the first thing is to make those linkages stronger somehow and to provide the opportunities for engaging. Maybe universities can help too.
Yeah, I can only echo what you're saying, Farida, because this is something that I'm, you know, dealing daily, this lack of linkage and the fact that we are lacking dining of support. There's to help artists, to help musicians who are facing those challenges, we need way more support. There is a real lack of resources in this field, in the field of artistic freedom, from also a standpoint of organization, but absolutely on the artists themselves. And I think I want to kind of move a bit the needle to something you just said, Sharida, because I know that also it's very important in all our work. It's mobility. its mobility. And I think that it's also intertwined with, you know, economic rights, social rights, and I love to hear, like, from Sarah, from, you know, having, you know, worked extensively at UNESCO and having, you know, wrote also about this specific challenge that artists are facing.
Yes, and you're quite right. They are interlinked. And as Farida said, the right to movement is not just about the right to get together and talk, but it's a right to go out there and work. And the visa regimes are expensive, they are restrictive. Sometimes in the arts, certain artworks, a certain kind of performance and film, you might just be called up and say, yeah, we'd like you to be on this set in this other country in a week's time, that sort of thing. That is important, and that's something that UNESCO is addressing on its freedom of movement. So yes, absolutely, these are all interconnected. Although, you know, there are so many different issues here. We just need to focus on, each of us needs to focus on all those different areas and to see where they are interlinking and where they might be obstructing the greater work that we need to do for true creative freedom.
Pamela, I'm wondering on the kind of, you know, LATAM perspective, and also on your experience with you know, with the performance art, because we talk about it. I mean, like, musician, art performer, and so can you tell us a bit more also on mobility in LATAM, in Latin America?
Yes, of course. I was just thinking about everything that's happening also as well in Latin America, and you know how we've experienced this in the last 2-3 years, a lot of political outbreaks in different regions. I was kind of relating this experience to the performing arts as well, and in particular to maybe theater and dance, and there is something that I think is easier in the perspective of theater, at least, which is usually theater is much more of a collective work. You know what I mean? So it's usually you would find different the perspectives of different collectives or groups that are working together, you know, and it builds an own community into which you could at least relate to. But I was just thinking that in terms of the musicians, and of course in terms of Khoi, for instance, who is here in this panel, it's something that is lived and learned more in solitude, you know. It's harder and it's more difficult because you have to try to build those networks as individuals. And in that way, the advocating, you know, the perspectives of being able to share different perspectives with peers, it also becomes a barrier. Of course, it might be easier to mobility-wise because it's cheaper, of course, to be able to go around by oneself. But yes, I think and I believe that in terms of that, also the fact that we're able now to have all these conversations among Zoom and also the digital platforms and the digital world has been quite a tool and quite a perspective that has facilitated the exchange, the mobility process, and of course also the ability to share these experiences within other colleagues. At least for the performing arts world, this has been a unique moment, I would say, after COVID. Regardless of all the terrible things that of course happen around the world, but the fact that we're able at least now to hear from some other people, from some other professionals, from some other organizations which are struggling along different parts of the world without being such in need of traveling ourselves, you know, from one side to the other to be able to share these experiences. So I'm just thinking also out loud on how we could make more and better use of these fantastic tools, you know, within technological devices and frameworks of action that can promote this networking along different regions, and particularly to have these discussions cross countries as well.
Can I say something which has nothing to do with censorship, but to do with the beauty of music, which Pamela speaking reminded me, you know, under COVID, there were so many artists, especially musicians, who in the midst of all the lockdowns and everyone's depression, some of the musicians came out on their balconies or on the street. And you could see this was extremely important for humanity to have that music, to be able to connect with that cultural experience again, and to be brought together through music. And I just thought we should not forget the beauty of music as we talk about
Farida,
censorship.
And I think that example that you're giving is highly related as well to the conversation that we are having, because as someone, I think Khoi brought this into the conversation, the perspective of the curatorial aspects of music and of arts being also a part of a barrier, you know, for some particular artists, not being selected, not being able to being picked as a standard, you know, whatever the standard is. Sometimes it's quality as we know it, and sometimes it's just you're not in the political framework that we want to discuss, because our organization, you know, has different problems with whatever other organizations, you know. So the beauty also about the COVID world and what happened there is that we were able to engage and to get to know a lot of more artists with no curation or curatorial aspects at all, because it was the freedom of every artist, being able, of course, to having an internet and that being another whole of a conversation, but the freedom of just connecting there and communicating your work with audiences, you know, in a outside of the chain of value, or the traditional chain of value. And I think that is also something that we should try to keep and maintain. I know we all want to go, you know, present and now in different parts of the world, but I think that digital has a lot still to offer to this conversation.
We are seeing so many acts of censorship also happening online. I think for artists, it's kind of a dual. It's a very challenging platform, because we are all connected, but also the attacks happen way more digitally than it was before. So I think that's kind of this liberating force that you're talking, Pamela, but at the same time, it can be a very repressive tool. So it's how we navigate and how we, artists especially, you know, can navigate this tool without putting themselves in danger. I want just kind of to ask you, you know, like, what are the things that we could do as collectives, individuals, as society, to really affect, you know, like change and support for artists, musicians, of course, but let's say artists at large. And I don't want to put anyone in a spot, so go ahead, share your thoughts.
I can say, of course, for me, it's advocating in every level. You don't need to be particularly an arts organization or specialist in order to advocate. This could be done at different levels, and there are different structures and supporting structures for this in different regions and in different countries. I would also say paying for attending the arts. Sometimes this is something that we as cultural workers, we forget to do, you know, because we tend to be around all these events that are usually, you know, that we can usually attend for free. But a very nice reminder is to also be able to pay, you know, for artistic work. And I think that is also in every level of responsibility, because that goes for audience members, but also to different arts organizations, political structures, you know, people that are expecting artists to work for free. And I think that is a situation that we can no longer afford as an artistic community.
I'd like to add to that, Pamela. I'm really proud of the fact that now when I'm asked to recommend people to take part in panels, particularly artists and freelancers, I always say, please pay a fee. And I'm actually quite surprised at how often people do find that fee. It could just be €100, it could be something like that. I think it's really important to remember that we're all taking time out. Artists are taking time out in order to take part in these events and to participate. And I think we should just speak out when we see an injustice. I mean, this goes everywhere. I mean, it's easier in some places, and you can't be speaking out for every injustice that we see, otherwise we wouldn't be doing anything else. But to just speak up when you see it, and not to be prejudiced. I have heard people say, okay, rap music, actually that's not very, that's not great. And so not get mixed up in the high art and low arts thing, which sometimes I still see cultural professionals doing. So yes, absolutely, standing up, speaking out, and paying, yes.
No, I don't know. I've already said, Julie. So I think there are some mechanisms that do exist for complaints, etc., at the international level. They exist at the regional level. It's possible that, not in my country, but in some countries, you may have national mechanisms where you can approach them. Because I think the violations should not be allowed to just pass. Because if they are, then the impunity grows, and with the impunity will come more and more oppression. So I think we do need as many voices in as many locations as possible, and the interconnection between, as I said, people who think of themselves as human rights activists and people who think of themselves as musicians. You know, they're compartmentalized. I think we need to all somehow find those bridges where we can work together, because I think it's really super important. I mean, Julie has heard me before, but I really have said incessantly during my mandate that artistic creativity, it's not a luxury. It's an essential part of humanity, and it needs to be protected and supported and respected everywhere. And it is also one of the key elements of making societies democratic, bringing out new ideas and vibrant cultures, etc. So really, you know, nothing new, but we just maybe need to do more of it.
I wish in the future artists and musicians can have the basic salary every month, like very basic, just enough to live, so they don't worry about doing this art or this music to for commercial to live, or have to censor themselves not to do this, not to do that. Yeah, too easier to live. I mean, the basic salary is very important way to keep music and art still alive.
Yeah, and my new thing, of course, also with UNESCO, Sarah, I did tell them, multiple people I met just a couple of weeks ago, is this question of valuing. What are we valuing through our education? Why are we not valuing the artistic creativity of people and only valuing certain things which often seem to be market connected in terms of engineering and production, et cetera, et cetera. This is essential to all of us as human beings, and therefore should be valued equally. I see no reason for that not to be brought on board. And I think it kind of has, you know, that's, I think, part of the reason of not paying artists is that this is extra. It's not the main part of livelihoods or whatever it is. Somehow it always seems to be something other than every day, everyone's experience. But from a human rights perspective, it absolutely has to be a right for everybody, and you have to protect it across the board with no exceptions. So I think that's something that we really, this is my new thing. What are we valuing in education? So putting it out there.
Yes.
It will be interesting to see what this pilot project in Ireland of providing artists with a universal basic income will come to.
Great.
I think it's lasting, and I may not have the details correct, but it's lasting for about 3 years, and it's been given to about 2,000 artists. And it was done in, as I understand it, in a random application. We didn't have to qualify for it. And something, again, I'll have to go back to my notes, but something like 9,000 artists applied. And we'll see what comes of that. So there is that discussion happening. Let's hope it works. Yeah, it sounds quite idealistic.
I mean,
but let's hope it
Ireland
works.
Ireland was one of the countries that was very happy with my report and wanted to do something about it. So they did understand. I'm really super glad someone is doing it, because hopefully that will set a precedent for others to see if it works well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's really critical to recognize artists as a profession. I think that the status of, artists, a status, either it's universal or non-universal, but a pay status and recognizing artists for what they are and what they bring in the society is critical. I mean, being in the US and having been raised in France, where we do have a status, not a universal status, but it exists. And here in the US, and seeing how artists are not considered as, like, what Farida, you alluded, is like it's considered as a hobby. It's just like you're doing that on the side and you should be happy doing it, which is nonsense, I feel, and totally irrelevant also for the benefit of our society and for the progress of freedom and human rights. Any concluding last thoughts?
I think we already talked
So
about talk about many issues.
Khoi,
And yeah,
I think maybe you should tell the audience where we can find your work, where we can go
Absolutely.
listen to your work, and how we can engage with what you are doing.
you can come to mai-khoi.com, or you can come to Spotify to listen to my music. The album is named Dissidents.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khoi.
Thank you. And since we're talking about what to do, there is still a UN Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights, and if there are violations, I think definitely they should be approached. And the website can be found on the OHCHR. So it's just, if you Google or do whatever, search for Cultural Rights Special Rapporteur, she's very nice. And then they circulate it amongst others. If there's something to do with education and artistic freedoms, you can contact me.
And I just say that Farida jumped the gun. I was just about to say, and a huge thanks to Farida, because it was your 2013 report on artistic freedom that really brought together all the ideas that were bubbling up into one concise, great document. And after that, that has spurred the kind of growth of discussions on artistic freedom and ideas. And I'd really like to thank you for that. And yes, you're quite right, the special rapporteurs, your successors, first of all, Karima and Alexandra, Karima Benoon and Alexandra Zantaki, are really the places and the people to approach when you have issues with an individual, or also they also put calls out every now and then. They have a particular topic, a particular aspect of cultural freedom. So do keep an eye out for that, and don't be shy about applying. And in fact, the website is certainly, compared with the many years ago when I started working and advocating through the UN, is far more simple and easy to navigate than it was, let's say, in 1980s. It was a nightmare. But yeah, thank you very much, Farida, for all your work and for being there.
Well, not at all. And I have to thank Free Muse and the many other artists and people who contributed to that, because we had many discussions before bringing it together, and Ole from Free Muse in particular. So starting with artists, but musicians, but moving into all the artwork and other things. So yeah.
Pamela, any last thoughts for our audience?
I have to say this in a panel of only women, and very interesting, intelligent, and fantastic artists of women, because that's also a point that we didn't discuss in specifically, within rights and artistic freedom. But in general, I would invite everyone to take a look at the IFACA website. I think there are a lot of reflections there. Well, Sarah and Farida are also involved in that, and we're looking forward into building up in these conversations very soon. Particularly, I'm super interested in see how this is going to move forward into, of course, taking action. But there's a lot in that website for people to go and look and delve if some of them are interested in human rights and artistic freedom.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for taking the time, for sharing your experience, your expertise. It was a wonderful conversation. And for any artist and any friend of artists who are facing persecution, they can always contact us here at Artists at Risk Connection. We are here for them. And so I think I want again to thank you.